But now it's time for our first presentation. Joona, Lehtomäki, please.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Is this thing on? Yeah? Good. Okay, so good morning on my behalf as well. My name is Joona Lehtomäki. I come from the University of Helsinki, and more specifically the Department of Biosciences, where I work as a postdoc on conservation planning research. But today I will be giving you a brief introduction to open science, which is in itself not an easy task to do, because open science, of course, is not something yet that you can define easily. Rather, open science is a collection of various kind of things, and I will not go through all of the things that I'm showing you on this slide, which, by the way, comes from Foster, which is sponsoring this event today. Rather, to make the point that whereas we have many of these overarching larger concepts, such as open access publication, open reproducible research, and so on, all of these can actually be sort of taken down to more detailed taxonomies, which is good to keep in mind today and elsewhere whenever we're talking about things related to open science, that we're not actually comparing apples and oranges. Now, of course, there are some sort of more down-to-words kind of definitions about open science. Here's one by the OECD, which is kind of a nice definition, I think. So bear with me, I'm just going to read it out loud. The terms referring to efforts by researchers, governments, research funding agencies, and the scientific community itself to make the primary outputs of publicly funded research results, including publications and research data, publicly accessible in digital format with no or minimal restrictions as a means for accelerating research. I would have used a couple of periods there, but that's okay. It has very important points in it. And then the sort of latter one here, these efforts are in the interest of enhancing transparency and collaboration and fostering innovation. Now, each of those words has meaning, which again, I'm not going to take apart here. There's a couple of interesting points that I think really relate to what we're doing here today as well. I particularly like the part here, the digital format, which is of course all about ICT technology. Open science is an old thing. Science in itself is supposed to be open, but during the last decades or so, the revolution in information technology has actually enabled many of the things that we will be talking today as well. The other part I would like to point out here is with no or minimal restriction in relation to the research products, which I also think is really important. I will not be giving you a definition what open in itself actually means, but here, minimal or no restrictions is really important. Open is not the same thing as free, and I want you to keep that in mind as well. Now, OECD is, of course, an economic or organization developed for collaboration and cooperation in economy, so they have the innovation part here, but it's good to bear in mind that open science is not only about innovation and efficiency. Actually, open science can mean a lot of things for a lot of people, and it's also important to consider what are the motivations for different people when they talk about open science. Now, I'm a researcher myself, so I've always considered to be part of this type of school of thought, if you will, the pragmatic school of thought, which is interested in opening up the knowledge creation process itself and enhancing science itself. But I do acknowledge fully that you may have different angles on open science, such as science needs to be more accessible to the general public. You might be interested in the access to knowledge to be equally distributed instead of being unequally distributed, and so on and so forth. For the rest of the talk, I'm actually going to be concentrating more on the pragmatic school of thought here. But again, I'd like to make the point that keep in mind that there are certainly different kinds of approaches you may have to open science, and I would expect that many of you might have a different approach to mine. Now, after those fantastic visual graphs, here's not so fantastic visual graph, but I'm particularly proud of it because I actually made it. That goes to show that I never became a graphical designer. But it serves the point to illustrate what I think scientific process in its essence means. Again, it's a bit sort of tilted towards natural sciences. If there are people from social sciences or humanities here, I assume that you might have a different picture in your mind. Potentially, this is what we consider usually when we think about what the science or the process of science is about. So we have some sort of an idea, which we formulate into a formal hypothesis. We then design some sort of experimentation with which we can actually test the hypothesis. We may collect some data through field work, which we then analyze, for example, through statistical methods, and then formalize the whole process into a scientific publication, which is published and becomes part of the scientific literature or the truth. Okay, there are many things here, of course, and the bulk of the time that scientists spend their time on goes to this bigger part of the process. But at the end of the day, it's rather this part that typically is what scientists get rewarded for and what other scientists actually see as the main output of the scientific process itself. Now, the problem is that, especially in the traditional sense of things, not too many people actually can access the final product, which is the scientific paper. Now, open access movement, which initiated already a couple of decades ago, started in part to respond to this problem that not everyone has similar kind of access to the final products or the scientific papers of scientific work. Open access is about making scientific papers freely available to everyone, not only to the scientific community. I'm not going to be talking about the details of open access publishing. I'm sure that some of the workshops later on today will do it much better than I. Just to mention that there are, even within open access, there are, of course, different kinds of models that you might follow. For example, the golden open access model, which is the traditional publishing of papers, fully open and free for all who are interested, or the green open access model, which basically means self-archiving of your scientific papers. But independent of whether you are publishing your papers open access or closed access, it still means that the scientific process, which, by the way, here is depicted very linearly, the only sort of phase that is public to the scientific community and the larger community is the paper itself, which, of course, has description of the methods and data used, but usually not in the detail that you could pick it up and start building on that work in ways you perhaps would want to like to. But I think it's a fair question that what actually happens to the rest of the process, which includes the data, scientific research data, and importantly also the methods used. This is something that traditionally has not been widely accessible to other researchers, let alone the broader public. Fortunately, nowadays, we have at least the technical capacity to make these scientific products available as well, including the data, including the methods, whether they're quantitative or qualitative. Of course, the issue here is not so much a technical one, although it is a bit a technical issue as well, but rather a cultural one. How do you actually build the incentive and meriting systems to a state that scientists would be seeing the benefit of making the rest of the scientific process available as well? So the real question here from a scientist's point of view is who benefits and for what? And as I said, coming from the pragmatic school of thought, I'm kind of directing the following to other researchers or the members of the research community by stating that who really benefits from opening up the research process is really you yourself. Many of the things that are sort of considered to be part of the open science movement, what we consider when we talk about open science, what we consider later on today in workshops in this event, are about making your own work more efficient, making yourself more efficient, and all of this has to be done before you can open up the science. But the important part is that even if one wouldn't be so interested, initially at least, about opening up the different parts of the scientific process, you can still vastly benefit from doing the things that we are learning about today. That is to say, if we consider, for example, open research data, in this particular case of the research process, you can maybe get some new research ideas from already existing data, or you can augment your own data by open data from other sources. Same goes, of course, for the analytical methods, whether we're talking about open research code or whether we're talking about some other kinds of methods. If those have been tested, optimized, and they are openly available, there's a real promise there to make your work more efficient as well. So, all of these different stages in the scientific process, I think many of the workshops today have really a lot to contribute to these different stages. Whether we're talking about enhanced collaboration, and by the way, this is bidirectional. I do not intend to say that you can only get ideas from the broader communities such as wikis, blogs, social media, but this is rather a very important part of science outreach nowadays as well, so making your own research better known. Data management planning is obviously something that I myself consider should be an integral part of science as it is, but that's not really the case. And hopefully that will change in the near future. Citizen science, basically meaning the involvement of other members of the civil society in the science process itself, may really contribute a lot to collection of scientific data, for example. And data sharing has the benefits that I already mentioned, as I did the benefits of open methods and open source code, for example. Naturally, the end products will still be the gold premium of science communication, most notably because this is the product that actually goes through the peer review process, basically guaranteeing the scientific validity of your work. Nevertheless, open access movement has achieved a lot, but there's still a lot to be achieved in order to make most of the science output openly accessible to everyone who might need it. So, coming towards the end of my short introduction to open science, these types of things have been attributed to the benefits of open science. And this is a bit of a recap what I just told, but bear with me. So increasing the efficiency of research, obviously something that every researcher themselves should be interested in. This same goes for promoting the scholarly rigor and enhancements to the quality of research. And enhancing the visibility and scope of engagement, as well as increasing the economic and social impact of research, are obviously something that may help you researchers and benefit the rest of the society in this interface between science, policymaking, and the interest of the society. Now, I'm not again saying that this is what will happen. I'm rather saying that this is something that can happen. These are actually coming from a particular report from already 5 years back, where a relatively large questionnaire was done in the UK, where academics and policymakers were asked to identify the potential benefits and the documented benefits of open science. But it's really up to the situation, up to each individual member of science and society to make these things happen. Importantly, these things don't happen for free. I mean, it takes a lot of work. It takes rather big cultural shift in the research community itself, and it also takes a lot of capacity development to learn the new skills that are needed to enable some of these things. And I really think that that's why we are essentially here today. And I'd like to sort of end my talk with something that I actually gave to audience already 2 years ago on Open Access Week, when I was giving a similar kind of talk in Viikki campus here in Helsinki, where I took a nice quote out of one particular paper from 2013, basically saying that open science appears to be somewhat like a proverbial electric car. An indeed sensible but expenseful thing which would be better parked in neighbor's garage. The idea everybody agrees upon, but urges others to take the first step for. And this was 2 years ago, and I'm kind of happy to report right now that, for example, in Europe, the registration of electric cars has surged about 50%. between 2014 and 2015. And for example, in Norway, more than 13% of new cars are already electric cars. Now, the analogy between open science and electric cars doesn't really fare maybe that far. But the point is, there seems to be now momentum more than there was 2 years ago, and I really urge all of us to keep it going. Thank you.